How should Christians deal with doubt? Today, I'm going to be talking about some personal experiences in my life that really shook my faith, but also how I witnessed God lovingly responding to me in the midst of my doubts. For those of you who are new to the channel, my name is Paul Michelson with Jesus Stories, and I'm just going to dive in and start to share about the first time I ever got really angry and started to doubt the goodness of God. This part of my faith journey starts back in December 2012. And at this point, I felt like I was on top of the mountain. And I can't believe it's already been 12 years since then. But I was just finishing up college, getting my degree in accounting, and I had a job all lined up for me at this CPA firm, at an accounting firm. And I was scheduled to graduate in the middle of December. And then I was scheduled to start working at this accounting firm first week of January 2013. And I remember there were a few other accounting firms that I interviewed for, but I wanted this specific job. And after I interviewed for this staff accounting position, there was a 2 week gap between when I was interviewed and when I got the call and was offered the job. And I remember during those 2 weeks, I would drive past this accounting firm on my way home from school, and I would just pray that God would bless me with this job. It was literally 5 minutes away from where we lived. And that was a big deal to me because the way my mind works is the less time you spend in the car driving to and from work, that equals more time at home with my wife and future family, right? Because at this time, my wife and I did not have any kids yet, but we were hoping to have a family in the near future. So having a job close to home was always a priority to me. And God was gracious and He answered that prayer and He blessed me with this job. So at the end of 2012, I've been married for about 3 years to my beautiful wife. I have a good job lined up for me that was super close to home. And then to top things off, we found out that we were expecting our firstborn child. We were so excited, and life literally could not get any better. Then 2013 happened. 5 weeks into the new year, it was the beginning of February. My wife has her first ultrasound appointment, and she was pretty excited, looking forward to hearing the heartbeat of her baby. She ended up going to the ultrasound appointment and that afternoon while I was at work. And I will never forget sitting at my desk in the middle of the workday, getting a phone call, and it was my wife who was on the other line. And the first words out of her mouth were, "There's no heartbeat. There's no heartbeat. The baby is dead." And that was an absolutely crushing moment in our lives. It turned this experience that should have been joyful into a time of absolute sorrow. And that was a very dark time for us. Over the years, since this has happened, and from what I've read, women can kind of have the tendency of putting this extra guilt on themselves when they should not be doing that. Sometimes, the mother might think, if only I would have done this differently, or exercised more, or ate more healthy food, then the baby might not have died. And in these situations, I really want to push fathers to step up and support the mother, reminding her that it's not her fault, that she could have been the healthiest person in the world, and it still would have happened this way. It's not her fault at all. It's just something tragic that can happen sometimes in this life. Um, but I remember driving home that same day, crying just like I am right now, and I could just feel God embracing me, saying, "It's going to be okay. I got you. I got you." 2 weeks go by. I'm at work again. And my boss calls me into her office and basically tells me that I'm not learning things fast enough at work. I'm not getting the job done as quickly as they want me to. And because of that, I end up getting fired. That was another crushing blow, just back to back. It was a 1-2 punch right to my gut. But I've always tried my best to look at the glass half full, trust in the goodness of God. Romans 8:28, right? In all things God works for the good of those who love him. I love God, and so I trust that in all of this darkness, he somehow can take the bad and create something good out of it. And that's what I was clinging to when these first two things happened. So there's two things that I already mentioned. There's two more things I'm going to talk about. The first three things are all interconnected together, and the last thing I'm going to talk about is kind of the last event that happens after the dust settles. But when you're going through tough times, it sometimes helps people just being able to make sense of why these things are happening to them. Like, I remember some of the thoughts that went through my head was, well, God, maybe you're allowing this thing to happen to me. Like, wait, maybe you're allowing me to lose my baby because you knew that I was going to lose my job. And that might have made things really stressful and difficult to provide for our family. And maybe you planned for me to lose my job because there's a different job out there that you want me to go get. And you can better use me at this other company or something. Now, I'm not claiming to know the mind of God or why he chose for these things to happen to me, but just being able to make sense of things to a degree, that helped me cope with things. But there was another event that, and I wasn't able to make sense of this, and that made it more difficult for me to handle than the first two things. Before getting into that, I kind of want to set the stage a little bit. I've always loved animals, I've always had pets. Many of you have already met Nala. She was the cat that so really interrupted one of my recordings a while ago. Another thing is that the missionaries knew that I didn't want to talk with Dave. So it's reasonable for them to be afraid of me possibly recognizing him if we were on. Oh my goodness. Are you kidding me? This is Nala. No. Here is a picture of when we first got her. She is a very sweet cat. And here is our other cat, Simba, who is also a very nice cat. So we currently have two cats, Simba and Nala. My wife has always wanted a golden retriever puppy. So recently we decided to make her dream finally come true about 6 months ago. And here she is. Her name is Luna. She is a 50-pound, 6-month-old puppy, and she's growing like crazy. Now, I was really pushing for us to get a boy dog and to name him Mufasa, just to complete the circle of life and keep the whole Lion King theme going. But my wife really wanted a girl dog, and that's okay. So, those are our pets today. Let's jump back 16 years. And man, when I say that, it really makes me realize how old I am. But let's jump back to 2008. My wife and I were dating at the time. I lived with my parents at home. She lived in an apartment. And she decides to adopt two kittens and name them Lilo and Stitch. Here is when they were kittens. And here is when they are a bit older. Stitch is the one with shorter fur, and Lilo is the one with longer hair. And he's laying down on the fence right here. Then, eventually, after my wife and I got married, we also adopted a dog and named her Roxy. Here she is. And let me just say, before you have human kids, your pets are basically your kids. We sometimes call them fur babies in our house. But I remember taking Roxy with me everywhere in the car, going on runs with her, taking her to the lake, and we just had a lot of fun together. So let's bring it back to 2013. At this point, we have Lilo, Stitch, and Roxy. Three pets was kind of our limit. I did not want to be the crazy animal neighbors whose house was basically a zoo. But tracking with the timeline, we lost our baby beginning of February. 2 weeks later, I lost my job. 4 weeks after that, in the middle of March, my cat Stitch goes missing. We would typically see him every day, and he would at least come inside to, every night to eat some food. But, one day goes by, 2 days go by, 3 days go by. I remember driving around the neighborhoods, going to the local pet shelter, and no sign of Stitch anywhere. After about a week, I came to the realization that he's gone. Yeah, we don't know what happened to him. Up to this point, and even after this 30 event happened of Stitch disappearing, I really tried to have a good attitude. A couple days later, it's the middle of the week, and I am finishing up eating my breakfast. And then I just sat at the table for a few minutes, just thinking about these three painful events that happened to me all in about a month and a half time frame. And I would say that's a pretty short span of time. Then, as I'm just sitting there, out of nowhere, I just break and I start shouting at God. My wife is already at work, and it's just me and God and nobody else. I remember yelling at him with tears of frustration just streaming down my face, saying, God, maybe I lost my child because you knew I was going to lose my job. I get that. And maybe I lost my job because you have a better job out there waiting for me. I get that. But me losing my cat, who I really care about, I do not get that. You say that all things happen for the good of those who love you. I do not believe that right now. Because God, nothing good can come from me losing my cat. Please prove me wrong. Then I got up, left the house, and looking back, I can see that in that moment, my faith was really hanging on by a very thin thread. Because once you lose your faith in the goodness of God, the next logical step is always, well, God, if you're not good, you're not a God I want to worship and devote my life to. And after I had that talk with God, I don't remember where my head was at the rest of the day, but I do remember 3 days later, it was Saturday morning. I got up, went to the gym, played some basketball, and I'm driving home. And as I pull up in the driveway, I look on our front porch and I see something on one of our chairs. It's a small gray kitten. I get out of my car, I walk up to her, and she was so friendly. And she just loved the attention. I had fun playing with her, and she just kind of hung around our house for the day. I remember later that same day, my wife was gardening. She was pulling out some weeds, and this kitten, as she was pulling the weeds out, would kind of bat at the roots and would just kind of play with my wife by doing that. And I remember looking at my wife's face and seeing a smile in a way that I haven't seen for a while. And this little kitten sparked a little bit of joy back into our hearts when we really needed it. After my wife finished up in the garden, she came inside, and as she opened the front door, this kitten did not hesitate and ran right inside our house. We enjoyed having her around, and she definitely brought a smile to our faces. But we were not going to keep her because we knew that she might belong to one of our neighbors. We didn't want to be the neighborhood cat thieves, right? But I remember at one point the kitten sneezed, which is pretty normal for cats to do, right? Except when this one sneezed, blood came out of her nose. After wiping the blood away, we examined her a little closer and started to notice how scrawny she is. And when you look into her eyes, you could see that her eyelids were a little bit droopy. And that's when it became pretty clear that this cat is sick and malnourished because she's probably been out in the cold for the last number of days, who knows how long without any food. So we felt sorry for the kitten. But again, we didn't want to steal her. And later that day, she ended up running back out the door, and we hoped that she would find the house where she lived or that the owner would find her. But there were not any lost kitten signs around our neighborhood, so we were not really sure where she came from. 2 days go by, and I'm next door talking to my neighbors, and they mentioned that they've been letting the kitten stay inside their house, but she's really not doing well. They let me into their back room to see her, and she's just laying on the bed, sleeping, looking very sick and fatigued. My neighbors said that they've been trying to find the owner, but haven't had any luck, and then asked us if we wanted to adopt her. My wife and I talked about it, and I'm thinking, well, we only have one cat and one dog right now, so I would be okay adopting a third animal and going back up to two cats. But three animals, that's our limit, right? We end up saying yes, and I picked her up, immediately got in my car, and drove to the nearest vet clinic. The vet checks her out, takes her temperature, and says that she has a temperature of 104.6, and that if this keeps up, she's not going to make it. They tell me that they're going to hook up an IV to get some more fluid into her body, and hopefully that will lower her temperature. They told me it would take a while, so I go back home for a few hours. Then later that night, I get back in my car and start driving back to the vet clinic. And this whole time, I'm praying that God will help this kitten to just hold on and survive. I get back to the clinic, they bring out the kitten, and she has this cute little pink cast on her arm from where the IV was in, and she was doing a lot better. She ended up making a full recovery, and we joyfully adopted her into our family and named her Sophie. Here's a fun picture of her with her pink cast on right after we got back from the vet clinic. And this picture was, I believe it was later that day. And man, she just wanted to be loved. And here she is laying in the sink. Sometimes I would turn on the water and it would get on her fur and she wouldn't even care. We both thought that was kind of funny. But when I look back at this whole experience, God blessed me and my wife with Sophie when we really needed some joy back in our lives. I mean, there were nights I remember just sitting on the couch, crying, and just holding each other. Real quick, if you know someone who has miscarried and lost their baby, I want to encourage you to reach out, make them maybe a gift basket, bring them a meal, because even though they might appear to be doing just fine on the outside, there's a chance that they might be really hurting on the inside. But God lovingly and perfectly guided this little lost kitten to our house, not only to bless us, but to prove me wrong, just like I asked him to do. Because if we still had three animals when Sophie appeared on our porch, we would not have adopted her. I would not have taken her to the vet, and she would have died. But because I lost my cat, which I was so angry with God about, it's interesting that of the three trials that I kind of went through, the one that got me the most upset was not me losing my firstborn child. It was not me getting fired from my job. In a general sense, it seemed as if it was the least significant event that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I told God, nothing good can possibly come from this painful event of me losing my cat. But then God shows up and says in the most gentle, loving way, yes, I can. Yes, I can. All of this happened at the beginning of 2013. And so those are the three events I wanted to talk about. There's one last event, and hopefully we can end on a positive note here. So let's now fast forward to 2019. Okay, so Stitch disappeared 6 years ago. And by this point, Lilo and Sophie are gone as well. And after some time, we decided it's time to adopt a new cat into our family. This is Shadow. He is a very sweet kitten. And on this other picture, I was washing the dishes while he was just chilling on my shoulder. The name really suits him well because he always had to be around someone. Anyways, Shadow quickly becomes part of the family, and I believe it was about 10 days after we adopted him. It was a Tuesday, and I noticed he was just kind of sleeping in one of the kids' rooms all by himself, just kind of being standoffish. And I'm like, okay, he just wants his space to rest for a bit, and that's fine. Just let him rest. The next day, I notice he's a bit more lethargic, and that night, he's just quietly sleeping on the couch. I fill up a small bowl of milk for Shadow to drink out of, and I set it close to his mouth, figuring that he would smell the milk and it would perk him up and he would drink some. Except he did not wake up. I picked him up and I was holding him in my hands as two of my kids are sitting next to me on the couch. I remember Shadow briefly opening his eyes back up and tried to let out a meow, but he did not make any sound. And even though I'd never seen this look in a cat's eyes before, it was very clear to me that Shadow was dying. And as I'm holding on to him, I'm calling out, Jesus, please help him. Please help my cat. No, Jesus. Please don't let this happen. After only like a minute, Shadow is lifeless and dead in my hands. I remember my 3-year-old son saying, "It's okay, buddy. It's okay," as he's talking to Shadow. But I was literally holding this kitten in my hands as he very unexpectedly died. And we don't know what happened. But that was a really sad night for our family. All of us. All of us were in tears that night. And the next day we had a burial for him. And we prayed and thanked God for the brief time that we had with Shadow. Just remembering, just as God gives, he can surely take. And I'll be honest in saying that I hated that night when Shadow died. I so wish that it didn't happen. It's still painful to think about right now. But because I remember where God has brought me from and how he has answered me in the past, I can look at this situation and confidently say that I know God can somehow use this painful situation for good, either currently or sometime in the future, because I've seen him take other painful situations in my life and create something good out of those when I was 100% positive that it was impossible. And I will choose to always remember when God lovingly and perfectly proved me wrong. Okay. So I do have more to say on this issue of doubts because I think it's important for Christians to find a safe space to talk about these doubts with each other without any kind of judgment. I also want to talk about examples of people in the Bible who doubted, how Jesus responded to those who doubted him. But that will have to wait for another episode because I feel like I've talked for enough on this one and I am an absolute train wreck. But now it's your guys' turn. Has there been a time in your life that you've doubted God in one way or another? And did you feel like God eventually responded to you? Or do you feel like he's been silent the whole time? I'd love to read about your guys' experience in the comments below. And if you have any additional questions or comments, you can drop those in the comments as well, or you can send me an email at jesusstories23@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you guys. Until next time, thanks for watching, God bless, and remember to never stop chasing after Jesus.